All right, so this will be Unit 5 talking about energy systems here. So the main focus of this unit is going to be on ATP, photosynthesis, and cellular respiration. And so first thing I'd like to talk about when going through this unit is I like to first go ahead and talk about ATP and what it is and what it looks like. And so that's what we're going to talk about today is ATP, the structure and the function, and then we're going to go ahead and move on into photosynthesis. All right, so moving on. So ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. So students here will typically like to make this mistake of when I ask them what is ATP made of, a lot of times what they'll end up saying is, and I'll in the choices that I'll give them, they'll say that the T stands for thymine, talking about that nitrogen base that we talked about in DNA and RNA. That is not what it stands for. It stands for triphosphate. And we'll kind of, whenever we get into the actual molecule of it, I'll show you what it looks like. So this is the energy molecule that's created by the mitochondria. Remember, that's being created through that process known as cellular respiration that we've talked about in our unit on cells. There are three parts of it. You will need to know the three parts. On the next slide, I have an actual image of it. There's the nitrogen base adenine. There is a sugar, ribose, and it has three phosphate groups, hence the name triphosphate. Now, a lot of students will oftentimes think that the A stands for adenine, and it actually doesn't. If you want to think about it that way, you can, that's fine, but it is adenosine, and I'll show you what adenosine means on the next slide so you can actually have a visual representation. Basically, adenosine takes into context the nitrogen base and the sugar as well. And so on the next one, I'll show you what the adenosine part of it is. So ATP is this energy molecule, and basically what we mean by this is that energy is released from this molecule, and we're going to mainly, for the focus of this class at this level, we're going to mainly focus on that third phosphate group being removed. And so this is what we mean by it. So this is a picture of the ATP molecule. So over here in the blue, the left-hand side, that's the adenine. That's that nitrogen base, and it's really easy to see why this is called the nitrogen base. If you look on it, you see all those ends covering it. Well, those are all nitrogen, so that's why it's considered to be a nitrogen base. Right here at the bottom, we see that pentagon shape, that 5-carbon sugar known as ribose. And then over here to the right, it has three phosphate groups, and those P's in the middle. Whenever you have a phosphorus with the oxygens there, that's what causes it to become a phosphate. One thing that you may notice about this picture, if you haven't picked up on it yet, it looks a lot like a DNA or an RNA nucleotide. Uh, and I'll just kind of rehash what that was. A nucleotide had a nitrogen base, just like this one does, but this one only had its adenine. It doesn't have all the other C, G, and T and U. It doesn't have any of those any of those bases. It only has adenine, and then of course it has ribose, the sugar. But whereas DNA and RNA only have one phosphate group, this has three phosphate groups. Now, if you look down at the bottom of this on the right hand side where it says when this P, I'm talking about when that phosphate group is broken, energy is released. All right, so whenever this section right here, whenever it is broken off, energy is released from this molecule. Now, I'll go ahead and tell you what that molecule becomes then. Um, if you notice, so if that T stands for three phosphates, well, then if we take that away, that phosphate group away, this one right here, then it becomes only two phosphates there, so that would be turned into ADP, which would be double phosphates. And then, of course, it goes back to the mitochondria to pick up another phosphorus again. So this is the ATP molecule. And these are, and I'll just go back real quick, these are the main things that you're going to need to know about it. You're going to need to know what it's called, the parts of it, what is it? It's an energy molecule. It's created by the mitochondria. And in this unit, we're going to actually talk about how is it created. Okay. and then of course energy is released. So a lot of people might think that right now I might need to go ahead and go into cellular respiration. The reason why I wait to do cellular respiration, even though I go ahead and talk about ATP, is whenever we talk about photosynthesis, we're going to talk about using ATP in that process. So I like to go ahead and hash over it a little bit because it is so short. And students are typically, y'all are typically more familiar with photosynthesis. So I like to give y'all something y'all are more familiar with because we're about to learn more than just, oh, this is how plants make food. We're going to learn how is it chemically that they are making food, and that can be a little bit daunting. So I like to start this unit off with something that you're going to understand and have a little bit more background information on and be a little bit more comfortable with it. So now we're going to go ahead and move on to photosynthesis. So first thing we're going to have to make sure that we know about photosynthesis is it is a chemical equation. So if I typically in class, I like to ask students, what do plants need? Whenever I ask you what plants need, students always tell me real quick, they're like, it needs sunlight and it needs water. But it also needs something else. It also needs carbon dioxide. So right down here at the bottom, I have the chemical formula for photosynthesis. We have our sunlight. That's our solar energy coming into it. We also have carbon dioxide and water. Now, those are going to react together and it's going to end up making glucose and oxygen. And if you think about it, that's where we get our oxygen from, is from plants. Plants give us oxygen that we can take in, and of course, we put out carbon dioxide, in which plants take in. So, we have a nice little, circle of life there, an energy cycle there. So this is the chemical reaction. So I'm also going to tell you something else you're going to need to know about this. Everything that's over here on this left side, the carbon dioxide, the water, and the solar energy, these are all considered the reactants because they're going to react together. The arrow is always going to point to the products. If you think of like a math equation, the equal sign, what's on the other side of it is the products. So this is what's being produced here, the glucose and the oxygen. Okay. And the reason why these sixes are here is it has to be balanced. So you see how this carbon has six? Well, this carbon also needs six. So basically, you write out the formula, you make sure that carbon dioxide, water, and oxygen all have a six in front of it. You don't have to put one in front of glucose. All right? So describing the process of photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is the process of changing light energy, taking that radiant energy that's produced by the sun, and we're going to actually store that into a chemical energy compound. That compound is glucose, it's sugar. And basically, how your body breaks that down, that's how we're going to end up making a whole bunch of energy. Okay? Of course, this occurs in plants. It does occur in other things. You have algae, of course. You have some um, photosynthetic single-celled organism that it's going to occur in. But for the sake of argument, let's say it occurs in plants because we're more familiar with that. So plants need light energy, carbon dioxide, and water. Remember, we say that if it needs it, that's the reactant. That's what it's going to react with in order to produce food. This is going to take place in the chloroplasts. Okay, I had no idea what that was popping up on the screen. I don't have any hyperlinks. All right, let's see if this works now. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Um, And it takes place in the chloroplast. We talked about that during our unit on cells. And it's going to use chlorophyll, and chlorophyll is just a green pigment that's going to be inside of that chloroplast. Okay? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. So there are actually two reactions that take place. So I know this is going to be a lot of information, but once we break this down on an image, have you ever heard that term that a picture could say 1,000 words? I think that, and I've had a lot of success with getting students to draw this out, and this really helps out, but I want to front load with some of this information. So there are two reactions in photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is one big reaction, but that's going to be broken down into two smaller reactions. We have light dependent side, so that would be the side that depends on sunlight. And then we have the light independent side, so this is the reaction that doesn't need sunlight at all. So the reactants for the light dependent side is water and sunlight. The reactants for the light independent side is only carbon dioxide. Now the products would be oxygen is the main product, but we also get a little bit of ATP and NADPH. We'll talk about those two. That's not going to be a big point inside this part of it, but we are going to talk about them just a little bit because they help explain the image and the process. And the products over here on the light independent side is glucose. So like we said before, you're going to need to make sure you know the reactants and products. So not only do we need to know the reactants for photosynthesis as a whole, being water, sunlight, and carbon dioxide, we'll also need to know the reactants for each individual reaction that makes up photosynthesis. You're also going to need to know where it takes place. So if I ask you where photosynthesis takes place, it takes place in the chloroplast. But if I ask you where the light dependent reaction takes place, well, it occurs in the thylakoid. If I ask you about the Calvin cycle, which is also the light independent, well, it occurs in the stroma. So there's basically, you're going to need to know where it occurs, the reactants and the products for photosynthesis, the whole process, for light dependent and light independent. And if you know those things, you'll get probably almost every single question correct. So this is an image here. So this is this image, this diagram here, if you can picture this in your mind, this will make it almost impossible to miss questions. And the reason why I say that is so this is a picture of the chloroplast. So the chloroplast is where photosynthesis happens. Everything that's on the top, light, water, and carbon dioxide, those are the reactants. Everything that's on the bottom, the oxygen and the sugar, which would be glucose, those are the products. Now over here where we see the light reactions, all you need to know is that these green things that are all stacked on top of each other, like this over here, of course, this is highlighted green because it's at the forefront. All these greens, all these stacks that kind of look like stacks of coins, those are all the thylakoids. So in each one of these things, they're capturing sunlight to perform the light reactions. Over here where the Calvin cycle takes place, that's the stroma. If you could pretty much take a line and draw down the middle of this, everything on the left side would be the light reactions, and so then we still have reactants and products. Everything on the right side, reactants and products, would be the Calvin cycle or light independent reactions. So right here, you see where we have this NADPH? I'm going to show you what's happening here. So CO2, what is it missing? It's missing an H, right? But look right here, oxygen, well, it was water. So this is going to be a very simplified thing that I'm about to tell you. It's not the most scientific way of describing this process. There's actually a lot more that goes into it. But at this stage in the game, it will suffice. This water molecule, this H, whenever it goes through this process, it gets stripped off by NADP. That's what's right here, NADP plus. It comes through and it's going to pick up this high energy electron, which is the H, and it picks it up and it brings it over here. So like we said that light energy was going to be used to help get this, make a organic molecule, which sugar is, but we're going to have to energize it. We energize it by taking this H and sticking it over here on this carbon dioxide as it goes through this cycle, and then we end up with a sugar, a carbohydrate, which is stored energy. Now to do this, it needs just a little bit of energy. And so this energy, this ATP molecule gets it started, but then whenever it comes right here, it's ADP again. That means it only has two phosphates. So when it comes back through the thylakoid, this light energy gives a little bit more energy, and then it's able to redo this process over and over again. Okay? So that what does the NADPH do? That NADPH, it carries that high energy electron. The high energy electron is the H to the Calvin cycle to produce high energy sugars known as glucose. That H is a hydrogen atom. So day one review, knowing about ATP, which organelle produces ATP? That would be the mitochondria. What are the three parts? We have adenine, the nitrogen base. We have ribose, the sugar, and then we have the three phosphate groups. Which nitrogen base does ATP have? Adenine. How does ATP release energy? It releases it by breaking off the third phosphate group. That's the one that's going to be on the furthest end, not the one that's closest to the inside, closest to the sugar. It's the one on the furthest end. After ATP releases energy, what does it become? It becomes ADP because it only has two or double phosphate groups. Photosynthesis review. What is the purpose of the chloroplast? The purpose of the chloroplast is to capture sunlight's energy in order to take that radiant energy and convert it into a chemical energy stored in a carbohydrate known as glucose, that's sugar. Why is photosynthesis one of the most important chemical reactions on Earth? Yeah, think about it. Not only does it start our food chain, it's also going to be where all of our oxygen and things like that are going to occur. What is the chemical equation for photosynthesis? You can go back and look at that. So we need to make sure that we know the reactants and the products. The reactants would be what the plant needs: sunlight, water, carbon dioxide. The products are what it's making. That's going to be glucose and oxygen. Describe the two reactions that take place during photosynthesis. Light dependent reaction, light independent. Remember, make sure you know the products and the reactants of both, as well as know where they occur at. Make sure you know what that high energy electron is. That's that hydrogen that gets stripped off the water molecule. And how does it move around? NADP is the electron carrier that moves that H around. And that's going to be very important to know what an electron carrier is, because we're also going to be talking about that a lot inside of cellular respiration. So I put this image on here to maybe help you out. If you would like to pause this and see if you can answer these, please go ahead and do so. This would be a great tool to use to make sure that you can answer them. I do have the answers on the next slide, so if you'd like to go ahead and pause this and see if you can fill it in, please do so. Okay, now I'm about to move over, but I did want to point your attention to one thing. Right here, you see these black arrows. You see how this black arrow is coming over here, and this would be the Calvin cycle side? Well, that means that this is where that NADPH. So I kind of help you out with telling you that this is NADP. Well, the opposite has to be up here, NADPH. This is ADP, so J has to be ATP. Okay? And so here are the answers. Are there. All right, so that's it for ATP and photosynthesis. Remember, I do have those review questions, and I would definitely practice being able to draw out photosynthesis and see if you can label it. Pretty much how that's done, usually I just draw like a big oval and then a whole bunch of little circles on top of each other that would be the thylakoid, and I just kind of go from there. If you're in class, you'll see exactly how we do that, because we actually do that as several activities in class too as a review. All right. Thanks for watching. Bye.